Welcome to video one. In this video, we're going to talk about stage one of healing trauma. And in this video, this is stage one healing, and it's part one. So in part one, we're focusing on trauma and your nervous system. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to share with you guys. We're just going to get right into it. So excited. Okay. So we're talking about mental health and well-being, right? And this is well-being in the nervous system. Stage one, what to expect. So what do you expect? This is an experiential presentation. There is a workbook that goes along with it, and you can follow along in the workbook. There's also plenty of opportunities to stop and journal. So if you're that sort of person, press pause, go grab your journal and your writing tools. If you want to doodle, there's a lot of opportunities for doodling as well. So there's going to be information, exercises, and plenty of time for reflection. And what I want to ask, in each of these presentations is that you remember there's going to be a lot of information presented. So the goal isn't to know everything by the end of this. It's a lot of information. It took me a long time to put this presentation together and also to learn all of this stuff myself, okay? So what I want you to do is just focus on what resonates with you, and as we enter this space together, what I would really also ask you to do is imagine that what does it feel like to be whole? What would it be like if I could just let go of the idea that I'm somehow broken, if there's something wrong with me? And if you already have done that in your life, then welcome. I'm so pleased. It's a tough thing to do, right? And so if you're willing to do that for this presentation and for the duration of the presentations and for the times that we join each other to consider that, just let the presentation wash over you as well. There's a lot of terms that I'm going to use that, you might not recognize them at first, but that's okay. I'm going to use them throughout the presentation in all of the different videos. And so you're really going to get a chance. You're really going to get a chance to understand the language, right? So don't be so focused on what I don't know or what I might know or what I need to know. I'll tell you how the brain works, right? We have filing cabinets. And so you want to focus on what resonates, because that's sort of like how you put something in your filing cabinet. So when you add things to your filing cabinet, eventually that filing cabinet gets really full, right? And then you start to make connections in the filing cabinet. And then you realize like, oh, I need some new files, a new filing system, a new spot to put the information. And that's how we learn, right? And so that's why I'm suggesting, give yourself a chance to just show up wherever you're at and listen and be present. And if you want to write things, then write things. If you don't, you just be yourself in this presentation and know that you'll get what you need. And the great thing is, it's yours. You can come back and revisit it. You can watch it with friends. You can use it again and again to get what you need. So I'm really excited for you. You're allowed to be both a masterpiece and a work in progress simultaneously. This is what I'm trying to say. So our topics in part one, sort of stage one healing stuff, right? We're talking about the nature of trauma, and we're talking about nervous system dysregulation. We're talking about nervous system regulation, and we're talking about tips and strategies to increase well-being. But for part one, we're going to be talking, as I said, about trauma and your nervous system. So trauma is linked to anxiety, depression, and PTSD, as I was saying in the introduction. So you're not alone in this journey, right? It's important to know that there are others walking the path beside you. Often we feel really isolated when we're going through something and we've been through things that other people make us feel like maybe they don't understand. So this is why it's so important to me. I help survivors of trauma by providing resources, by helping develop skills for coping, and by connecting them with community. So your care needs when you are a trauma survivor, right? You need trauma-informed care. We encourage and assist people in increasing their knowledge about mental health, right? We aren't trying to be the expert in what happens to you. We want you to know that you're the expert. So we want to support people in learning what works for them to increase their well-being. So I say that we because this is the movement that you'll find professionally. People move towards trauma and resiliency in terms of when we look at this model. Anyway, I'm getting a bit nerdy. I'm sorry. So I like this image, right? Because this is what we're talking about. When we want to address mental health, right? We need to dig deeper. We look at the medical model, right? We look at this individualism, the DSM, and this pathological kind of way that we look at, oh, you've got this diagnosis, and we medicalize our pain, right? But when you look underneath it, oh my goodness, there's all these things that cause mental health problems, right? Discrimination, inequality, oppression, racism, mass incarceration, trauma, injustice, all of these things. So I just want to encourage you to know as well, if you like any of these slides, then just stop and take a screenshot, right? Okay. So this is a moment when you see these open-hearted or this lovely little heart, it's a moment to stop and reflect in your journal if you care to. And I just want to ask you, what comes to mind when you think about mental health in this way? Maybe it's a familiar way to think about mental health. Maybe it's a new way. So, the reality is trauma changes our reality. So I love this quote, my past is an armor I cannot take off no matter how many times you tell me the war is over, right? You're all right now, it's okay. But you still have these triggers and you can't get rid of them no matter how many times people tell you that you need to, right? So this is why you need what we call a client-centered approach to mental health, right? That's trauma-informed. So it's all about understanding, right? It's not about what's wrong with you. It's like, what happened to you? How have your past experiences informed the way that you're navigating your life? So when we talk about trauma, we have to talk about your nervous system. All right. For those of you who know this stuff, then awesome. And those of you it might be new, as I said, let it just wash over you and be okay with that. Just realize. That won't do. Fancy's fancy. Thanks for your patience, you guys. I'll try to cut this out if I can. So we can't talk about trauma without talking about your autonomic nervous system, which is great news because this is why it's so gentle. The healing process can be so gentle, right? Your autonomic nervous system, it has these two wings, maybe the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, right? An easy way to remember it might be to say sympathetic is stress, parasympathetic is peace, okay? And when you think about your autonomic nervous system, you want to think about the fact that it talks to all of your organs through these two different pathways, right? So it's either your parasympathetic or your sympathetic, and it's talking to your lungs, your heart, your blood vessels, your liver, all the way down, right? Two different pathways. So what I want to say about those two different pathways is when one's on, the other's off. When one's off, the other's on, right? So the sympathetic nervous system, we talk about the fight, flight, and freeze response and stress, right? So when your fight, flight, or freeze response is overengaged, mental health and physical health problems occur because your nervous system is what we call dysregulated, okay? So rest, restore, relax. That's the peace, the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So when we want to engage your parasympathetic nervous system, right? That allows your body to restore homeostasis when you are habitually dysregulated in a stress response, okay? So homeostasis, oh my God, what is that, right? It's the optimal resting point for your physical, mental, and emotional health. The research shows these days, right? The research is so fascinating, right? And the research shows that we have an optimistic brain, right? That this homeostasis, this natural resting point, when we support our nervous system, it supports our brain, and it's much easier to change the way that we're thinking, right? So homeostasis, right? It's just a fancy way of saying balance, right? And like I said, it's the term that we use to define that optimal resting point for your nervous system, okay? So we're going to talk about trauma now. And I just want you to take a minute, right? And just open up your idea of what trauma may or may not be. You might have a great understanding of it, and this may broaden your understanding, or it may just solidify what you already know to be true. So these days, what we say is, trauma actually shows up as anything that overwhelms the brain's ability to cope. Huh, right? So this quote, trauma shatters your most basic assumptions about yourself and your world. This idea, life is safe, I'm safe, people are kind, I can trust others, the future is likely to be good, and it replaces them with feelings like the world's dangerous, I can't win, and I can't trust people. Okay. So the basic assumptions, right, are that things are good and you're safe. These are the basic assumptions that mostly we're born with. Okay. So how trauma impacts your well-being. It's important, right? And so it shatters your sense of self. You'll hear me say that again and again. The types of trauma, acute, right, which is a single dangerous event, right? Chronic, ongoing event, or right, events, or unresolved acute trauma. Okay. Complex, right? That's exposure to a variety and multiple experiences. So we get a complex trauma response with that. So an example for acute trauma, right? This is like cute and acute. I'm teasing, but I mean, who doesn't hate speaking in front of the class and maybe feel traumatized by that teacher who would call you out and make you so embarrassed, right? That one-time event, that situational acute trauma. Another example, a car accident, right? A physical injury, maybe you broke your arm, an emotional injury, right? That's why I'm saying it's that situational, an emotional injury, right? A situation that just sort of overwhelmed your ability to cope, and it became this, what we call flashbulb memory. Okay. Remember, I am a psychologist, so I'm going to use a lot of terms because we like the research, and psychology is science. So that's why I'm so excited about all of this. So when we talk about trauma, we can also talk about chronic trauma. This is like an event that carries the trauma forward because the aftermath is so intense, right? And then that leads to a greater impact, maybe, right? So the examples of this are like a natural disaster. Maybe you lose your home, right? The loss of a loved one, the loss of a child, right? Creates a chronic trauma. I mean, it's a acute, it's chronic, and it can also be complex. Okay. So overwhelming health problems, again, can be an example of a chronic trauma, a divorce or a breakup, right? So when we talk about chronic trauma, some of my favorite examples are these fellas, these brave fellas, the firefighters or the first responders, right? So I'll get them in my office and they're like, I don't know why I have anxiety. I don't know why I'm depressed. I don't know why, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I know why. So it's a collection of dramatic events. It just wears down your nervous system over time, and it leads to this dysregulation. Okay. And so, maybe you like hanging from a building, right? Maybe you like driving in the fire truck with the sirens blazing, right? But maybe you don't like showing up to clean up the aftermath of an overdose, right? Maybe you don't like having to go to car accident scenes where people have passed away, right? Like there's parts of the job that will lodge in the nervous system. And maybe it was raining that night when you showed up to that spot. And so maybe that rain sort of will trigger that response. And you wonder why, because you didn't really notice when it was happening. Okay? So like I said, these guys, they are usually like, I don't know why, it just came out of the blue. I'm like, right, out of the blue. Okay. So then the other part of the trauma response that we have to talk about is this complex trauma response. It's usually the result of abusive relationships, right? Physical, sexual, emotional abuse. Let's be real. It happens. It's out there. And we can't talk about trauma without including these important topics. And that's why I say, when you've been through that complex trauma, going through the trauma was enough. The idea of healing it can just be overwhelming, right? And that's why I want to reassure you, we're going to do this in a gentle way. So we're going to also talk about intergenerational trauma. We can't talk about trauma with relationships without talking about this idea that family patterns are passed down generationally, right? So you may recognize these 8 rules of dysfunctional families. Get your camera, right? Okay, I'm teasing. So control. You have to be in control of feelings, behavior, and relationships. That's actually not the truth, right? Like that can be a dysfunctional thing to lay on your kids. Perfectionism, right? You got to be right about everything. Are you kidding me? Blame, you blame yourself or you blame someone else. The blame game. Oh my God, it is so awful. I've been there. I'm not, you might think because I'm a therapist that I'm saying these things like, and I don't do them. Please don't judge me. Okay. So denial of the 5 freedoms, right? Deny feelings, thoughts, perceptions, wants, and imaginings. Okay. My parents are both sexual abuse survivors, right? And so these dysfunctional family rules were just passed down silently, right? My folks didn't understand that they were doing that. They certainly wouldn't have done it if they knew they were doing it, right? So there was a no talking rule, right? We didn't really talk about things honestly until very much later on in my life, right? Myth making, you're always looking on the bright side. There's no problem. That's that toxic positivity that we all love so much, right? Incompletion, staying upset and confused without resolving differences, right? The problem never gets resolved. It just sort of keeps on going and nobody ever really talks about it, and it happens and then keeps happening and you don't talk and it never gets resolved, right? And that sort of leads to this unreliability, or maybe unreliability was just a family trait. You couldn't rely on your parents. So then you learn not to trust anyone, right? Then you don't have to be disappointed. You're the kid who's riding yourself to every skating or basketball or every event that you need. You've already figured out, like, my parents aren't going to drive me. I'll get there myself. This is important to me. I need to do it myself, right? So that you might really pride yourself like, I'm so independent, right? But I often have to extend my compassion to those of you who have that fierce independence. Takes one to know one, right? Cheers. It's actually a subtle trauma response. Okay, we'll talk more about that in future presentations. So right now we're talking about childhood trauma. So this quote is so pertinent, and I'm going to warn you, right? Through this presentation, we're going to have some moments where things might hit you deep, okay? And that's why I was saying, go with what resonates. And when we have trauma, it closes our heart, right? And so as these things hit you, your heart might be opening, and you might be like, whoa, when your heart opens, sometimes things rush in really fast, and you can have realizations that maybe you're like, oh, that's big. You're welcome to press pause, go have a tea, go have a walk, go have a smoke, take a break, shake it off, right? I'm going to teach you some techniques to manage that nervous system dysregulation. Use those. Be aware. That's called backdraft, and it might happen as you work your way through this course. And when it does, you're going to support yourself and you're going to develop a practice to be able to support yourself. And I'm so excited for you to be able to learn these skills in a super gentle way, to be able to use them when you're really upset, and then be able to shift the patterns in your life. So excited. Okay. So wounded children have a rage, a sense of failed justice that burns in their souls. What do they do with that rage? Since they would never harm another, they turn that rage inward. They become the target of their own rage. They repeat in their thoughts the same harmful words that were spoken to them. They must lash out, but the only ones weak enough to attack are themselves. Okay? I'm going to leave that right there. That's deep. There we go. So what does trauma do, right? Mentally and emotionally exhausted. Look at that little dog. I would have added physically, but I can still move my pinky, right? And that's what a lot of us are doing. We're like, oh, we're good because we're still moving our pinky, right? So trauma impacts your physical health, your emotional health, and your mental health. I'm telling you. It leads to nervous system dysregulation, and that's what we're focusing on right now. All right. So look at this chart. This chart is amazing, right? Behavior, physical, emotional reactions. Look at this chart. Who doesn't recognize some of these things when you are a trauma survivor? Let's look at the emotional reactions. Feeling nervous, helpless, or fearful. Sad, guilty, rejected, abandoned. Edgy, easily upset, annoyed, right? Experiencing shock, being numb, unable to feel happy. Feeling hopeless about the future, irritable, angry, not trusting others, being over controlling, having a lot of conflicts, right? That can be like a way of life for some people, right? Physical reactions, trouble sleeping, right? Your stomach is sour, upset, you can't eat, headaches, sweating, right? Like you're thinking of the war. This is from PTSD. It's a chart from PTSD, but this is trauma. Maybe you don't exercise anymore. You don't even care to feed yourself. You're not taking good care anymore, right? Maybe you get a rapid heartbeat or breathing. You're drinking too much, you're smoking too much, you're using drugs too much. You have other health problems that are getting worse because your nervous system is dysregulated and your health. Remember what I said, right? Now you can start to feel for what we're talking about. Behavioral reactions. Trouble concentrating. I'm jumpy and easily startled. I am jumpy and easily startled. When I'm in the staff room at work sometimes, and I'm just like do, getting my lunch, and I can't hear the people coming down the hall. They come around the corner into the room and I freak because I'm easily startled, right? So go easy on yourself. You might have a startle response. It's just a trauma byproduct, right? Just laugh it off. It's okay, right? Being on guard, always alert. Okay, so that's something that we combat with our nervous system regulation strategies. Okay, avoiding people or places related to the trauma. Who doesn't do that? Work or school problems? Yeah, because you can't put up with someone's bullshit anymore. Sorry, I'll try not to swear throughout this presentation. So loss of intimacy or feeling withdrawn, detached, or disconnected. Another one, right? Trauma. So trauma responses, what might it look like for you? These are common ways that trauma responses can show up in your everyday life, okay? Fight, flight, freeze. There's another one, fawn, that we like to throw in there these days. It might be new to you. If it is, again, cheers. It's water. I'm drinking water. I'm always drinking water, right? Or tea. So flight, right? So what you might see in someone who's got a trauma response and they're overengaged flight is a workaholic response. They may be overthinking, anxiety, panic, OCD type stuff, difficulty sitting still, perfectionist, okay? Maybe you'll see that. The fight response, right? Maybe that trauma response will stir up angry outbursts. Maybe the person's really controlling, right? Maybe they're a bully. Maybe you see some narcissistic tendencies in there. Maybe they had explosive behavior, okay? The freeze trauma response is often characterized with difficulty making decisions. You're stuck, right? You're dissociating, you're isolating, you're numbing. The fawn trauma response is a big one when we start to talk about relationships, right? People pleasing, lack of identity, no boundaries, overwhelmed, codependent, right? You don't know me. I was listening to Brene Brown the other day, and that was one of her things she and her sisters say when their therapist says something that's right on the money and they're talking about it later. They'll be like, you don't know me, right? Oh, I don't know you. Yeah, I betcha. So these are trauma responses, right? I love that. You don't know me. I love it. So what comes to mind for you, right, when we talk this way about trauma? This would be a moment where you could pause and write in your journal. Okay, we're going to talk about something called the ACEs. This is some fantastic research that has come out of the United States. The ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, okay? And what we know now is adverse childhood experiences influence the health and well-being throughout the lifespan, okay? So adverse childhood experiences are a predictor of an early death. That's not good, right? It disrupts your neurodevelopment. What does that mean? It interrupts your nervous system, right? And then it impacts your brain, like I'm saying. And then it causes social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Oh my God, Vanessa, what does that mean, right? It means it impacts the way that you think and the way you interact in relationships, right? Oh, and then what happens? You adopt health risk behaviors. Why? Because you're numbing, because you're escaping, because you're trying to get away from your trauma response, right? Oh, and then what happens? You get disease, disability, and social problems. Oh, and then what next? Early death. Brutal, 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 brutal. Okay. So you might be wondering, like, what are the ACEs? Okay. So the ACEs are the adverse childhood experience. It's some important research that's been done that shows the reality of adverse childhood experiences. I don't know if I said that in a way that made sense. I'm reading it as I go. So what are they? Let's get back on track. witnessing violence, right? A parent in jail, sexual, physical abuse, substance or affected parents, disappearance of a parent with a mental illness, okay? So those are some of the adverse childhood experiences. But you can absolutely go and Google this research. It's all over online, and look into it for yourself if you feel like this is something that really lands with you and you want to know. So we want to talk also, when we talk about well-being and healing, about Maslow's work. He has this important work, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay? So this is the junior hierarchy. I'm going to show you the senior hierarchy later in the presentation, okay? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, down at the bottom, those physiological needs, you need to have those met in order to get up to the top, which is that self-actualization place where you're going to heal your trauma, right? So safety needs, right? Physiological needs. These are important foundational things. Loving and belonging needs, esteem needs, and then self-actualization, right? So basically what trauma does is it robs us of all of these kind of physiological needs often, right? Safety needs, definitely. Loving and belonging, very much often, because especially that relational trauma, it impacts our ability to connect with people. And we're actually social creatures with this social engagement nervous system. We're hardwired for love and connection, believe it or not, right? Our nervous system is hardwired for love. It's super cool, right? But when you get wounded by people who are supposed to love you early on in childhood, it creates all these wounds. Attachment theory, we'll talk more about that kind of stuff later on. Like I said, just let it wash over you, take what you know, add to it, right? And we'll continue to build in future presentations on all of this knowledge, right? But Maslow's hierarchy is a great tool just for checking in with yourself. And remembering, right, that you're building a foundation in stage 1 of regulation skills, and stage 2, you're looking at the way that you think, and in stage 3, you're integrating changes, right? And so when you want to make more change in your life, chances are you need more regulation strategies, more changes in the way you're thinking, and then more changes up top as well. So I like the way that this hierarchy of needs matches the way that we're moving through these stages of healing. So something to consider, right, about childhood trauma. It can also be a parent denying your reality, not being seen or heard within a family system, being told directly or indirectly that you can't or shouldn't experience certain emotions, having a parent who overcompensates for what they felt was missing in their own childhood. That can be tough, right? Or having a parent who's really focused on appearance, like it really matters to them how you look, or having a parent who can't regulate their own emotions. We're going to talk about that more in the second half of the presentation, because when we're kids, we're meant to learn to self-regulate through our parents. But if our parents can't self-regulate, then they use us to regulate. And then we learn that we're here to co-regulate, and then we don't learn to self-regulate. And then it gets awkward because we actually need to self-regulate as adults. Okay, we'll talk more about that. I love this quote. It's deep, so get ready. Trauma in a person, decontextualized over time, can look like personality. Trauma in a family, decontextualized over time, can look like family traits. Okay. Trauma in people, decontextualized over time, looks like culture. Deep. And this is really what we're talking about. So I just love that. It's an amazing time to be alive, and so many good people are doing such good work out there. So I want to say at this point, be kind to yourself, right? Often, this is where participants need to stop and reflect in their journal, all right? So this is the end of stage 1. Part 1 of our stage 1 trauma healing video. And the next video will be part 2, okay? And we're focusing on self-regulation stuff. So I will see you there. Remember, if you need to, get a glass of water, take a break, journal or not, dive right in if you're curious to keep going. If you need to take a break, take a break. Pace yourself. All righty. See you soon.